Welcome, everybody. We're very excited and happy to be with you today with our wonderful panelists. These are filmmakers whose work I've been following for a long time, and I very much respect their body of work. And today, just to introduce myself, my name is Carla Gutierrez. I'm a documentary editor, and I'm going to do a brief audio description. I am a light-skinned Latina with curly hair that drops to the shoulders. I'm wearing dark black glasses, and I'm in an office with a green wall behind me and a couple of frame pictures. Every one of our panelists is going to do a brief audio descriptions of themselves once I introduce them to you. Our panel today is about inclusion and equity in documentary filmmaking. And pretty much basically, we're going to be talking about the importance of having different perspectives, diverse voices, voices of women of color, non-binary, people of color in our community, telling the stories that are, examining our country, our past, our present, and our future. And we have this wonderful panelists that we're going to discuss all these big picture things with. And I'm going to introduce the first filmmaker that I'm going to introduce is Ramona Diaz, who is an award-winning Asian American filmmaker. She's her most recent film is called 1,000 Cats, and it was just had a 1 week showing at the Montclair Virtual Cinema. So probably a lot of our audiences has already seen the film. And if you haven't seen it, it's going to be on Frontline on PBS November 2020, right? That's correct, Ramona?
January 2020. It's after the elections.
January 2021. So
2021, yes.
2021. So don't miss it when it comes out. And her work, I've been seeing your work since Imelda, and her work is really a very comprehensive view of the culture, the history, the social dynamics of the Philippines, and also the Filipino-American connections. So I'm really happy for you to be here. If you want to describe yourself to the public.
Thank you for asking me on this panel, Carla. So I am Ramona Diaz. I am Asian. I'm a Filipino. I'm brown. I have straight dark hair. Sometimes it's dark brown, sometimes it's black. I'm sitting in front of a shelf of DVDs here in Baltimore City. I am wearing a white top, and that's it. And thank you again for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you. And we're going to go to Ursula Liang. She's the director of Down a Dark Stairwell, which is actually an official selection to the Montclair Film Festival. So our audiences are going to be able to watch it at our festival. And it would also be broadcast on PBS in the near future. And the film was part of the Human Rights Watch Film Festival. And she is a print journalist turned filmmaker. She's also on the board of the Brown Girls Doc Mafia. And I've met her a couple of years, Ursula, and she's just like a badass filmmaker. Really, very happy to have you here. Go ahead and please describe yourself.
Thank you so much for having me here, and special thanks to Montclair for having my film at the festival. I am a Chinese and German American woman with long brown hair and self-cut COVID bangs. I'm wearing glasses and an orange tank top, and I'm in kind of like the most uncluttered place of my apartment, which has a white wall and one white painting on the wall, and also like a mirror. And I guess in tone, I'm very similar to Carla, so it's hard to describe, in my race category, but I would be like a little medium for Asian, or light to medium for Asian, and dark for white.
Thank you. So we also have with us Yoruba Richen. She's an award-winning filmmaker. She recently directed and premiered 2 amazing films that I have recently watched. One of them is The Sit-In. Harry Belafonte hosts The Tonight Show, which premiered at Tribeca, and you can currently find it on Peacock. I believe you also broadcast on MSNBC. And also her latest film, is at the center of the current conversation that we're having in our country. It's called The Killing of Breonna Taylor, which premiered on FX and Hulu. And, it's, something that everybody needs to watch like yesterday. So Yoruba, please describe yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be with these great filmmakers and colleagues. So I'm an African-American woman, medium to dark skin. I have the COVID hair, which means that I have a hat on my head. And I'm sitting in front of a brick wall that has a picture above it.
Thank you. And then we also have Mia Sara Lai, who is the community manager for Brown Girls Doc Mafia and a technically driven filmmaker. She has produced work for American Airlines, Nike, NBC, Universal, among others, and has worked internationally extensively. You've been to many, many places that I haven't been to. She is also a co-founder of Ethnocene Collective, and she's a member of the Asian American Documentary Network. Welcome, Miasarah. Can you please describe yourself?
Thanks, Carla, for having me. I feel really honored to be on this panel with these esteemed filmmakers. So I am a Puerto Rican Chinese female with a black ponytail, wearing a yellow top and a white background.
Great, thank you. And if you've noticed, we have mentioned Brown Girls Doc Mafia, Documentary Mafia, which I'm a proud member of, and all of our panelists are proud members of this great organization. So just to start, we want to ground the viewers and just for them to know what is Brown Girls Doc Mafia and what is the mission of this organization. So Miasarah, can you tell us, please?
Yeah, so Brown Girls Doc Mafia is an initiative. Really, it's a community of women and non-binary filmmakers of color that work in the industry and support each other. So this initiative, we think about support in many different ways. We want to think about it holistically. So it's a space for us to debrief with each other. Just to kind of work out the for lack of a better word, the bullshit that happens in the industry. To talk to each other, get some support. To emotionally support each other, be our own, hype team. And also, we understand that there's many barriers that our filmmakers experience. So the ways that we try to approach that is to advocate for people for different opportunities, try to get people's foot in the door. One huge way is to try to fund for people to go to different, back when film festivals were in person, or back when professional industry events were in person, was to try to get people there through different stipends and such, and also help getting different job opportunities to our community, and doing master classes and such.
Thank you. So I would love to start just by doing a brief description of your film for the people that haven't seen it yet, and urge, if you haven't seen it and you're watching this panel, please go find these amazing films. We'll start with you, Ramona. I really want to understand what kind of pulls you into the stories that you choose, and so what brought you to 1,000 Cuts?
Yeah, okay. So 1,000 Cuts is a film about press freedom in the Philippines under President Duterte, would-be authoritarian. So it's seen through the eyes of one journalist, Ressa, who has become this global icon for press freedom. So while we were shooting her, she became Time Person of the Year and Time 100. And it's also a film about disinformation. Right? So how press freedom and disinformation intersect, and how social media platforms are weaponized. And the film takes place over the midterm elections of 2019 in the Philippines. So that's the container of the film. So as far as how, I go with themes, right? So especially with 1,000 Cuts, I was finishing my previous film, Motherland. And President Duterte became president. And shortly thereafter, his drug war started. And I started seeing photographs of the drug war on my feed or social media. I mean, and people were sending it to me. They were horrific. But I also understood that he ran on the drug war. He promised this and he was doing it. And there were like dead bodies in the streets, right? And so I knew I get pulled in, right? It's like, oh my God, do I have to make this? Yes, I have to make this, because how can you not, or at least explore it? So I did. I started exploring the drug war. I also grew up under martial law. I'm a martial law baby. And it took so many years to build institutions in the Philippines, and to have to go back to some kind of authoritarian rule was horrific for me. So that's why I was drawn to it. So by the time I got back to the Philippines, I think, on the ground there at the end of 2017. A lot of people were on the ground making that film about the drug war, because it's very sensationalistic. It was breaking news. And I don't do breaking news. I don't know how to navigate breaking news. So I started looking around, and Maria Ressa, she was the loudest voice. She's not an opposition voice. She's a journalist, but she was the one really talking about the drug war and impunity, and the weaponization of social media and disinformation. So it was something new that I sort of incorporated into my thinking. And the intersectionality of that was really, really interesting for me. So I started I introduced myself. I met her and started hanging out with her, and thought that she would be the film. I didn't think she would be the center of the film. I still had ensemble. If you see the film, it's like sort of an ensemble cast, but she is the center of gravity of the film. She becomes progressively so, because as we were shooting, she became progressively the center of the film. So that's how I get drawn to stories. It's things that I can't turn away from. It's things that will haunt me at night if I don't do. So, and I think it has to be because you spend so much time thinking about it, right? And I spend so much time with the people I film that I'm obsessed with them. So I better really care about it. So, and that's usually in my career, that's what usually happens. I'm drawn to people, I'm drawn to themes, I'm drawn to things that I want to explore for myself. And hopefully it attracts an audience that is also interested in it. I'm always my first audience. So I feel like if I'm interested in it, someone else might be. Yeah. So that's how it starts.
So I want to take a little bit of time to show the trailer of your film, and then I have I think a key question that I really want to ask you. So we're going to show you a trailer now.
Mr. President, is it important that people be afraid of you? Fear.
Yes.
Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa.
Maria Ressa carries the torch of press freedom in a country held in thrall by a populist president.
It started with the drug war.
Do not do drugs, because I will kill you.
President Duterte began his administration with the drug list.
This is the drug industry of the Philippines.
He showed everyone a list. People on that list started dying.
I'm telling the Filipino people it's gonna be bloody.
We demanded the government be held accountable.
Duterte was annoyed by our reporting.
You are a fake news outlet. They will be allowed to criticize us, but you go to jail for your crime.
We started getting attacked on social media. The government created disinformation networks, so people have no idea what the truth is. I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour.
We don't even know whether we can trust the police to protect us.
Just because you're a journalist na ito, you're exempted from assassination.
We didn't even realize how dangerous it is for you.
Why are you crying?
Because I'm scared for you.
Maria Ressa has been arrested.
The charges against Ressa were aimed at intimidating those who challenged Duterte's rule.
If I fall, I stand up, break these walls.
So why should you care about what happens in the Philippines? They test the tactics of how to manipulate America in our country. If it works, they port it over to the rest of the world.
I'm never breaking down when the odds against
Maria Ressa was one of 4 journalists named as Time Magazine's Person of the Year.
Maria won't be afraid. I'm afraid for her.
That's where I'm never giving up. What we're seeing is death by 1,000 cuts. Little cuts of Philippine democracy. We will not duck. We will not hide. We will hold the line.
So Ramona, obviously you have a connection to the stories that you tell. I mean, your body of work really shows this interest in exploring what's happening in the Philippines. And, you know, I'm really curious, like you mentioned that there were a lot of other filmmakers like following the drag story. But you are Filipino-American, you have this personal connection, and you know, have been doing a lot of research for your films there in the Philippines. So what is it like, why is it really important for you to tell this story? And what do you bring that is different from maybe like outsiders coming into this world?
You know, when I started my career, I didn't feel entitled to the stories. I felt like I always had to prove that I was the person to tell it. And I kind of believe the ongoing narrative of proving why it was me that needed to tell it. So I never felt entitled to it. But I felt, you know, I feel a deep connection to the people I film. I think at the end of the day, the films are really the products of my relationship to the people. So that's why it's always going to be different. Someone else can make that film and it'll be their relationship to that person. But I feel deeply that it is a result of that relationship, because I need a lot of trust from them because I am in their lives. I always say that knowing what I need from people, I'll never say yes to me, because it is, even if they give you access, it's ongoing. I mean, I don't think that they trust me in the beginning. I have to earn that trust, and rightly so. But I feel it's different because I am partly here and partly there. I know it well. I also feel that sort of burden of representation. I need to get it right all the time because I'm being given this chance to tell it. Having said that, I think there are changes in the industry, a little bit. I mean, it's changing ever so slowly, but it's changing, because for 1,000 cuts, it took an executive to ask me, to tell me. She told me at Sundance like 2 years ago, she goes, you know, you should be telling a story about Duterte. I hadn't even thought about it. I mean, I was thinking about it, but not deeply. She goes, do you have a story about Duterte? I'm like, sure, of course. Of course you have to say yes, right? As an executive. Of course I do. But she was you should tell it. Tell me your story about Duterte. No one had ever said that to me before. And I've come to, I should be telling you a story, rightly so. But it took many, many years. So things are changing. But also this executive was Black, right? I mean, it takes that. It takes the gatekeepers and everyone else to be diverse and different, and people of color and BIPOC. And I'll never forget that. She was the very first one to ask me that. And this is like oh my God, it's my 5th film, right? It's my 5th feature. And she came through. And also the other stakeholders who came through later on also acknowledged that. But it took a long time. But it is now part of the conversation. Who gets to tell the story? And we get to tell the story, and rightly so. We should own the narrative. We should really claim it.
Oh, I mean, it's interesting because whenever I think of like the learning about the Philippines and having like a lens into that world, I think of you. Like that's, you know, like you have been, really, like you have been the narrator of and my understanding of that part of the world. So and I think you are the right voice to
thank you.
To give me that information. So we're gonna jump to Yoruba. We're gonna show the trailer for the killing of Breonna Taylor, and then if you can, you know, spend a little bit of time describing what the film is about and what brought you to the project. So here's the trailer.
The last thing she said was, "Turn off the TV." Next thing I remember is a loud bang at the door.
911, where's their emergency?
Somebody kicked in the door inside my girlfriend. Breathe, God. Help!
No one ever told me really what happened. I didn't find out that she was shot by a police officer till I saw it on the news.
She had a very inviting personality. She always had like a problem solver attitude.
The media tried to assassinate Brianna's character. We can't keep quiet.
Immediately, there were red flags. There were bullet holes everywhere. It was a war zone in there.
Once the shooting occurred, they never searched the apartment any further.
Justice needs to be rendered. The question is, will that happen?
It has to stop.
All right, go ahead, Yoruba. Please tell us about your film and what inspired you to follow this story.
So first off, I just have to say, Ursula and Ramona, I'm so excited to see your films. I've seen bits and pieces and various components, but I've been anxiously awaiting them. So great to be in conversation with you. So this film was one that was made very quickly in response to the events that happened this summer. I got a call from the New York Times, which has a television series. It used to be called The Weekly. Now it's called The New York Times Presents. And the paper had been covering the case of the killing of Brianna by police officers in her home, which happened in March. They had been covering the story a little bit, but there were still lots of unanswered questions. And the attention, the media attention and the public's attention was gaining. She was killed in March. This was in June. There was, with the killing of George Floyd and other killings by police of African Americans, her name had become part of the mantra of calling for police accountability. So they called me, and I should say that I was so it's the New York Times, and it's a production company that produces the series. And I was I was made aware that this production company was all white, and that they strongly felt that an African American and specifically an African American woman needed to tell this story. They needed to find an African American female director. Now, of course, we were also in the middle of the racial uprising that has been happening and the racial reckoning that has been happening or in all industries, including ours. And so I do think that was a part of their decision as well. And as Ramona said, things are slowly changing. I'm not sure 2, 3, 5 years ago, they would have had the same inclination or understood the importance of having an African-American person tell this story. So anyway, when I was hired and I was immediately, when they told me what it was about, I immediately said, yes, this is a story that, is vital to shed light on Brianna and on, on who she was and what her, and try to find out what happened to her that night. So that's what the film does. It looks at, and we always wanted to tell that story, not just about the investigation, but about the who Brianna was as a person. Oftentimes these names become memes, they become slogans, which is very important, to get the name out there, but the person is lost. And the person, and not only who she was, but what she meant to the people around her, to her family, to her friends, to her loved ones. And what is so it's kind of so obvious in some ways, but really strikes me in making this film is that Brianna was not just, a 26-year-old EMT, essential worker. She was, during COVID, she was also a beloved daughter, a sister, a mentor, a beloved friend. She meant, so her death is, the loss of all those things, not just her as a person. So the trauma, that reverberates like all through the community. And so that trauma is really real. And we try to capture that, the trauma of her community, the trauma of the city. And then of course, try to shed light on, what happened that night. And we knew we wanted to get this film out as quick as possible. And because there were so many unanswered questions, even though it was still unfolding, and obviously we see it still unfolding till literally today. But I am very happy that we did so. Some people question, why are you doing this story as it's unfolding? And I think what we see now is that the film shows a fuller picture, quite frankly, of what happened that night than we're getting from the from the AG and from, the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, which came down with, just one charge of endangerment, wanton endangerment for one officer that hit the other apartments, not Brianna's apartment. We show that there were multiple witnesses who say that the police didn't identify themselves. And one witness that says that they did. And, the AG, that was so striking when I watched that press conference. The AG's version is that, the police did identify themselves because this one witness says they did. But of course, in our film, we have multiple neighbors who says that they did. So my point is that we show what I think is a fuller picture of the complexity of what happened that night and, who's the versions of what happened that night. And obviously, one version is being put forth by the LMPD and by the Attorney General.
Yeah. So I love hearing you talk about this full picture, because when I was watching it, that's very much what I felt the film was giving me. Like, after being exposed to the story through the media in so many different ways, I really felt that your film had an intimacy that beyond the dissection of what happened and the acts of the police. We really get a full picture of her and her family and her friends that you can't really get through the news. That is the power of documentary film. And I do feel like you were as a Black woman, you were the right person to tell this story. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, because I felt that there were some specific scenes in the film where, kind of the relationship or the reaction that the people that you were interviewing had towards you. There was something that I felt really opened up in terms of how they were relating to a Black woman behind the lens. So can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I think that the New York Times was right to reach out to you, obviously, why?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's kind of ephemeral, in that connection when you're talking to someone from your own community, even though, I'm not from Kentucky, I'm not from Louisville, but I understand the trauma that we have experienced in our community around police violence is generational, first of all. It's generational. It's something that we not understand just intellectually. We understand it emotionally and viscerally. And we, want, the majority of us, I would say, and obviously not all of us, really want to see what we can uncover to understand why this happened. And it's not, and there may be, specific laws. There's the law, right, of what you do is, maybe legal, just as segregation was legal and slavery was legal. Those were laws and policies, but we also understand what's right and wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So that I think is a different lens. So as a filmmaker, as a filmmaker, I'm in both the questions that I'm asking and in the edit and in the information, I am, I'm meeting a journalistic standard of reporting the information that we find, or, figuring out what information is relevant to our story, making sure that it meets the journalistic and ethical standards. But I'm also know that it's bigger than just that, right? And that that there's going to be, that the law may say one thing, and may the law, be written to protect the state, which it is. And then, so therefore, what are we trying to say in the film about why this young, innocent woman was killed? Because we know, we can all agree that should not have happened. So therefore, we have to look at the bigger causes. So I think that's one thing. And then I think just in terms of interviewing, right? What I learned, and this is really probably the first time that I have interviewed people who have faced trauma so immediately, so soon after I'm interviewing them. And it's a dance of finding out the information that we need to find out, and the questions we need to ask I need to ask of the characters, but also I am not going to re-traumatize them, right? I'm not going to re-trauma, and there's very specific ways, and I saw how that could happen if you're as a filmmaker, and so I was very careful not to do that. And there were, so it's and just it's a human thing, and I'm not going to re-traumatize this community, these people who are in my larger African American community, because we are all traumatized right now. So, I don't know if that answers the question, but those are some of the things that, I was juggling with. And I think being in the community, being an African American, was essential to helping me figure those things out.
Yeah. So Ursula, can you tell us about Donna Dark Stairway?
Yeah, Donna Dark Stairwell is a story about the Peter Liang Akai Gurley case. It's a case from 2014 where a Chinese American police officer killed an unarmed innocent Black man in the stairwell of the housing project. And I think because this is airing in New Jersey, a lot of the folks that are listening probably are aware of it. And it was a story that was very well covered, and places like the New York Times were very fascinated by it. But I sort of felt like the coverage that was happening didn't quite understand all the things that were going on. From a person with an Asian American perspective, I felt like I saw an opportunity to really grab onto a piece of history that was happening and report it in that way. The protests that were happening in support of Peter Liang, the Chinese American police officer, were very large in scale, and they were very unusual for our community. And so I sort of knew that this would be historically very important to our community, that this would be something that would be taught in every single Asian American studies class from now until eternity. Whereas I think the general public really saw it as something different, and it fits sort of into this general space of activism. So that became a priority for me to sort of to be seeing it through that lens as I was filming. The incident when it happened was on the tails of the Eric Garner case and sort of this earlier emergence of Black Lives Matter movement. It was about 4 months after Eric Garner was killed, and then nobody was indicted. So what ended up happening in the case is the Chinese American police officer was indicted, and the Chinese American community really rallied in large part around the police officer. So, as soon as I saw the name in the headline, I was paying attention right away because we actually share the same last name. And another thing that I understand that people outside of the community don't understand is that this is a very popular name. I'm actually not related to him, but I do have a brother named Peter. So it was one of those things that stood out to me right away. And Ramona talks about sort of feeling sort of forced to tell stories. For me, a lot of times the storytelling feels like there are all these little signs that add up to make you know that it's your story to tell. I like complicated stories, and like Ramona said, if it's a story that you keep thinking about and you can't look away from, and you keep tossing and turning in your head, then it's a story that you feel like you can commit a couple of years of your life and all of your energy to. And so that's how I started on this project.
So I was really curious when I saw it. I really wanted to hear from you, how did it feel to kind of navigate between two very different perspectives of, like communities looking at this case through very different points of view. How was that experience for you, and the reception or access that you got to that, for those two communities?
Well, we thought it was very important to tell the story from the point of view of these communities of color. Most stories about people of color are told in relationship to whiteness, and this story had a lot of us in it. And by us, I mean people of color. And so we chose early on to really only have voices of people of color. So we didn't interview any white folks. For me, straddling, I come from a background as a journalist. So I think that people in the world are very used to seeing sort of activist-oriented stories, advocacy films. So they're very used to films showing both point of views, but really having the lens of one person or some major characters. This is definitely more of a chorus of voices. And so it was very, it was very delicate in the edit to try to figure out how to balance things. And it's never like a one-to-one thing. It's about emotion and various other things. But, in terms of accessing the community, it was, I am not a Black filmmaker, and I'm not, I'm a mixed race Asian person. So there's always like the question of like how people will perceive me when I relate with them. But what I did when I was approaching the Black community is that I approached in person, because I didn't know if my last name would be a trigger point and re-traumatize people. And I was told later that it might have if I'd sent them an email coming from this, the same last name as the officer that killed their loved one. And I also made sure to have like crew that was diverse. It was not working with an all-white production team. I very, very carefully chose the people I was working with, and I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy. And I think that a lot of production companies don't do that. They don't put the work in, but I made sure that I had the right people surrounding me for every scenario that I would be in. I would say that the Black community is more comfortable with the media and how the media can be used to promote causes or to have their voices heard. And that's, sort of my general view of the community. And the Asian American community is much more unfamiliar and uncomfortable with media. So it was actually, I would say in some ways, a little bit harder to access the intimacy of the Asian community for that reason. The first day we met Akai Gurley's aunt, we asked her, could we put a mic on her? And, she was just standing on a street corner doing like a speak out. And we were filming this public event, and then we asked her to put a mic on her, and she did put a mic on, and she walked through the pink houses where her nephew was killed. And that was a kind of generosity of story that she offered right away. Whereas, some of the folks on the other side, it took us, 2 years to get an interview with them. So there's a difference. And I think part of it is that there's so little media about the Asian American community. There's so little coverage that every single piece of coverage feels like everything. And so everything needs to be perfect. And, you need to be shown in a perfect way. So I think the community is starting to learn or getting to learn that sort of the complexity and nuance and flaws of the community are really essential to seeing the community as like not a monolithic group and as a more human, relatable group.
Mm-hmm. So, we have this amazing opportunity to talk to 3 women of color that are, guiding this creative process. You guys are directors, producing. But, this you don't see a lot of our voices like this as leaders of our production. So Miasarah, I would love you to just give us a bit of a sense of what the landscape has looked for many years. Are voices represented? What is really like the presence of BIPOC filmmakers and voices in the documentary landscape?
Mm-hmm. I think generally, like, there has been a lack of representation that has been changing over time. Like, for example, with Aruba, her describing that there's this white production company that needed to kind of fill in the hole. And I feel like when you look at larger productions that get attention or get onto large platforms like Netflix, a lot of those names are not communities of color. So there's definitely this push towards having and understanding the value and the importance of having someone on the team who is making decisions on the film itself.
Yeah, and just for our viewers to understand, there's a thing that we call extractive filmmaking in our community, which sounds bad, and I think it's bad. So could you define it for us and explain why that kind of filmmaking could be hurtful to the communities that are being portrayed in those films?
Yeah, I think it kind of, the way that I like to think about it is like, we live in a society where capitalism is a reality. So there are limited resources, and often for larger productions, I mean, for documentary in general, it takes several years to get a production going. But people want to minimize because of these limited resources, like how many shoot days people have. So there sometimes isn't like an investment into the community or investment into how long you're staying or building relationships into the community. That's like not even factored into budgets that are created. Like, oh, let's think about how much resources we're going to invest into the community. It's like, how much resources can we invest into the final product? Let's extract the story so that we can make money off of this product by, selling it to different platforms. So I think that it's sort of inherent into the mainstream way of making documentary filmmaking. And I think, when you have independent filmmakers, they're like kind of what Ramona described of, it's about her relationship to the people that she's making the film about. There's more of an investment into the community itself. So that's what I think, when we're talking about extractivism filmmaking, I think it really comes down to resources.
And this is a question for the filmmakers. I mean, you've talked a little bit about the process of building that trust and also the process of how to be accountable. I mean, obviously films have such a power to kind of define and present an image of those characters and the communities that they come from. So how are you mindful of that power when you are, getting access, when you are, or if filmmakers are even doing the research when they're coming into, if they're coming as outsider to a place, into a story. So how are you mindful of that process? Like, how do you think about it? You've talked a little bit about the process of spending a lot of time, gaining access slowly. What kind of research and early research do you do to be accountable to the people that you're asking to follow? Let's start with Ramona.
I've been on both sides. So I've filmed people who I was obviously more empowered, right? I had more power over them. I've also filmed people where I was disempowered, like Imelda Marcos. So those are two different things. But I'm always aware of where I am in the power structure, right? Mm-hmm. So let's take Motherland, for example. I was filming really very, very poor women in a public hospital in the Philippines. And I knew that even if I explained the film, they didn't fully understand what the film was about. And also, it's a public hospital, and they come in late in labor. And what are they going to tell me? They see me as part of the bureaucracy, right? They see me as part of the hospital. And therefore, I knew that in a way, they couldn't say no to me. So I had to make it very clear that I am an independent. You can say no to me and you will still get care in this hospital. That's really, really key, because if they can't say no to me because they feel like it's attached to their care, then I mean, obviously there are ethical problems there. So to me, I always have to define what my role is in here. Say no to me, you still get care. And if you have questions later on, I never make it as yes, no. It's like, can we film you now? We'll talk about it later. If you feel uncomfortable, it's an ongoing conversation all the time about access. And release forms have to be in the language. That's really key. You can't give them a release form that's in English, right? Or in my case, different dialects. Because sometimes they don't understand Tagalog. They speak a little bit of English and their dialect. So I have to figure out, okay, which dialects are, then we translate it to their dialect. And really explaining, because I don't really feel people, they don't understand why their story is important and why them, right? So, but they turn a corner at some point. If you really patient and explain to them, they turn a corner and then they understand why their story is important, and then they'll help you. But that's a process of constantly explaining to them why. And there's some days, obviously, I give them an out, right? I get, not a forever out, but I always say, I know, I understand some days you don't want to be filmed. Don't ghost me. Just tell me, right? That I'll understand completely why. But something happens where they also get attached to you. You know, in a way, they get attached to the attention, they get attached to you talking about them. Because I always say that the time spent with the people I film, not filming, like we put down the cameras, like Motherland, it was with Nadia Hallgren, right? We would just, I said, okay, let's drop everything, and we'd sit with them and talk to them. So the time spent talking to them without shooting them is as important as the time spent filming them, right? So if you have like 8-hour days, where a lot of times you would just sit and talk to them, and then 2 hours of filming that were golden is more important than anything. So I really think it's caring deeply about them, like really wanting to know more, and that takes time, that takes energy. But I love that process. Yeah, I love the process of filmmaking more than I actually love like. I shouldn't say this to my distributors, but you know, I love the process of filming. I love the actual collaborating with crew and talking to the people. I love that part of the film, but, you know, more than anything else.
Yeah,
the editing is like, I'm a great editor. So.
I love the editing. You know, I think this might be surprising, but you know, the notion that your characters, the subjects of your films, are not only a potential good story, like really understanding their entire humanity, and you know, I mean, I'm gonna speak from my perspective as an editor. Like, I find that really good research and like accountability on the production side of, like, you know, developing the story in you know, with like really good grounding of understanding the context, the history of what the story happens. Like to me, it's really important to guide the edit in an ethical way. And that doesn't mean that you're compromising any artistic experimentation, or, you know, I feel like it frees you. And I really love working with directors that, you know, really ground. I mean, you know, some of you have mentioned this journalistic, you know, discipline that you bring into a project, which I find like really useful for creative decisions in the edit.
And I think what's really key too, just one more thing, is to be very open in the process. I mean, I'm willing for my mind to be changed, right? I don't have this prescriptive story where I know where the end is already. I want them to change my mind. I want them to challenge me, because I want to go there. I always say, if you know how it ends, then you might as well be doing fiction, right? I mean, especially with the kinds of film I make, it's life is unfolding in front of you. So, but to be open, and then if you find that they're not that nice, some people you film are not that nice, you know, what do you do then, right? If there are ethical problems there, that's always interesting, because then you have to deal with it. Then it's a whole other way of thinking about the people you're covering, you're filming.
So Ursula, same question. I mean, how do you negotiate that responsibility that you have with the people in your film, and you know, what do you bring from the very beginning in terms of research, and how that trickles down all the way to creative decisions in the edit or the color or graphics? Yes.
It's all very complicated and difficult, and I just have to do my best. I mean, I think what Ramona said about being very clear with what you're doing is very important. In my case, I had to make sure that they knew that I wasn't just presenting their point of view, and keep reiterating that. I think one of the things I always try to do with folks is ask them at the top what they would want to see from a film on this topic, because I want to understand what that is. Not necessarily to like abide by it, but in the case of like most of the folks I spoke to, I think that a lot of our goals aligned. You know, the family members and activists wanted this film to help people remember Akai. And, you know, they had very specific things they wanted said, but yeah, I think our goals did align in some ways. You're not able to promise all those things, but I also think it's important to prepare subjects for what's to come beyond the film, sort of the editing process, like how long it's going to take, what it looks like when the film comes out, what it looks like when it gets to festivals, what it looks like when it gets to broadcast. Those are things that folks that are not familiar with the filming process don't totally understand. And that can be, you're always trying to think within the edit about making sure that people are fairly represented, because the sad thing is that you have a 3-hour interview and it has to get to 2 minutes at some point. And you want to make sure that you're not misrepresenting what they said or misrepresenting their humanity in some way. But there's also, there's that level of fairness, but then there's also the exposure that people who are more at risk are going to be more impacted by. So the great folks at Firelight have been chatting with a woman named Sahara Driver and Annie Mercedes, and they have like documents that they will prepare and hand out to their subjects in advance. Like, this is what it means to be called like a subject, and this is what it means when you're going to be, what it's like at a film festival. This is what it's like when people watch it on PBS and then start tweeting about the story. So I think those are things that help care for subjects in the ongoing life of a project. And one thing that I think is always a huge concern when you have like a power imbalance is to help people understand the economics of documentary filmmaking too, because most of us who work in the indie space are not getting rich off these projects, and in fact are going into a lot of debt. And I think that a lot of people, once they've shared their stories, have the feeling that somebody is profiting off of their sharing. And so I think that's important to talk through. And, Yoruba also mentioned like re-traumatizing people. That was something we thought about a lot in our film. Ultimately we decided not to do an interview with somebody because there was already an existing third-party interview we could use, because we knew, as a filmmaker, you're like, God, I wish that background was different and I could have been there to ask the questions. But it served the role that needed to be served in the film. And while I would have, as a filmmaker, liked to have had the original interview, I had to weigh whether it was necessary, whether this person's personal experience was more important than, the footage.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we're tight on time. Like, this is moving fast, really fast for me. But Yoruba, I'm gonna come to you. But also, I feel that there is a lack of representation for our voices still out there. I don't see that many production teams that are being led by people of color, and as an editor, I don't see that many editors of color being hired, unfortunately. So if you can very briefly maybe touch on the question that we had, but also what can audiences, because our Montclair, the people that are watching this are the people that consume the media, right? Like, how can audiences support these necessary voices in the documentary industry?
Totally. I'll just say briefly about the first question, that this was, as I started off, the Brianna Taylor film was made very quickly. We started in June, and it aired in September. So the relationships had to be made. I had to make those relationships very fast. And also, as I said, these folks had just, obviously the trauma had just happened. It was very, very, current in their lives. And also too, because it was unfolding, there still was a lot of stuff that we didn't know, that I didn't know about, some of the people that I was interviewing, and in terms of what information we were getting in terms of the case. So it was very much, I had to sort of balance all those things on the fly as I tried to make the film, which was different than other experiences like Ramona and Ursula talked about, having multi-year relationships where you can really build those. And so this was quite a different experience. But still all the same things apply, I think, in that you are, want to be honest about what you're doing. You want to prepare them for what the film looks like when it's done. You want to, and this was tricky, because we were also telling the police side of the story. Mm-hmm. So there were things in there that, we were reporting that was from the police side. So the family needed to know that. That was, I think ultimately we assured them that, again, the film was looking at the larger issue of why this happened. Not necessarily just was it legal, but why this happened, why this tragedy happened. And yes, I think audiences, need to demand more stories that are told by us. And also, I think, and we've seen recently in a couple of instances, that when stories are not being told by us, by white filmmakers telling stories of people of color, that we should say something. And we as filmmakers should say something, which I think we're starting to do. And also audiences should say something. Because when you talk to audiences, they want that content as well. So I think it's about speaking up. And if we speak up, if we continue to speak up, I think the gatekeepers, have no choice but to listen.
Mm-hmm. So Miasarah, I want to end with you, and I would love for the audience to have an opportunity to go look for the work that the Brown Girls Doc Mafia is doing. How can they support it? And also, obviously there's like different ways that we're making these films, that you guys are making these films. Most of your films have been produced independently. You are trying to get the funding, but there are, companies are there, the streaming services, that are putting a lot of funding into, docuseries and what needs to, Miasarah, what needs to change there? How, what needs to change there for these voices to really be supported in a concrete way with real funding? So yeah, let's finish up with you.
I think there's so many levels and points within the filmmaking process that we need to get more people of color in there. Like what Ramona described, there was a person of color exec. They're the ones that are making the decisions behind money. So we need to get them promoted and in these places. For audience members, what Yoruba described of maybe not consuming certain films because there's not a person of color on the team. Just don't watch it. Watch other films where there are communities of color. Another place, a lot of our filmmakers are fundraising on platforms like Kickstarter, GoFundMe. So some audiences can go on there and look for different filmmakers to try to support them, and also just look at the team. Make sure the team or production. For investors, if you're going to invest in a production company, try to invest in a production company that has, various roles filled by people of color. In terms of Brown Girls Doc Mafia, there are many organizations and collectives that are supporting different kinds of filmmakers of color that you can go and donate and support what they're doing. For Brown Girls Doc Mafia, we always have our donation box there so anyone can go and support what we're doing. So those are places you can go. There's other, communities like ADOC, Asian American Documentary Network. There's Black Documentary Collective and various other ones. If you go to Getting Real, there is the option to donate to several different organizations, but also you can just follow up and read more about those different organizations.
Could you give our audience your website address?
Yeah, it's browngirlsdocmafia.com. Very straightforward. Yeah, you can always, you can always find us, stay connected to what we're doing. But just, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we need everyone to contribute in their way and in any way that they can. It's a collection of small changes that will create a large movement of change.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been a treat talking to you. I have so many more questions about your films, but I'll get to ask them once I see you in person, hopefully in the near future. But I really, really appreciate you coming. To the audience that is watching this, please, 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 I urge you to find these films. These are really, really important films, necessary stories for all of us to know about and to discover and learn more from. So please go out and get them. Yoruba's films are right now Peacock, Fox, Ramona, your film is going to be on online.
Sorry, Peacock and Hulu.
Oh, I'm sorry, Peacock and Hulu. Ramona, your film is going to be
We're still in virtual cinema. We'll be in virtual cinema for most of the fall. So 1000cuts.film. You'll see a list of the participating theaters there. Just choose the theater you want to support. Buy a ticket and you can watch from home. So 1000cuts.film.
Yeah, and thank you for being in Montclair. That's how I saw the film. So
thank you. Yeah.
And Ursula,
yeah, thank you, Montclair.
Can you tell us where your film is going to be, if you can?
Yeah, it's playing in festivals this fall. Not all of them are announced, and I don't remember the timing of this, but you can find out more at all of our social media and our website, which is noncompliantfilms.com. And it will be on PBS probably in the spring of next year.
Okay, and that's our panel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.